Welcome to the Alaska Weather Show. I'm meteorologist Peter Chan, coming to you from the National Weather Service on behalf of a special partnership with Alaska Public Media. It is Tuesday, December 27th, 2022. We are in the closing days of this year with the new year not far away. And if you'd like additional weather information on top of what I provide, you can go to weather.gov. That is the National Weather Service's online presence. It'll bring you to a map of the continental U.S. with Alaska and Hawaii in the lower left. Just point and click anywhere on that map and it'll bring up forecasts with any relevant watches, warnings, or advisories. Plus, there's plenty of other information to find on this site. And looking across the country today, boy, you heard about just the deadly winter storm that impacted a large area of the country, and especially Buffalo, New York, hit for the second time this season with an epic snowstorm blizzard. We now have winter storm warnings, winter weather advisories for areas of the Intermountain Rockies, and then also areas of the Cascades on down through Sierra Nevada and California, as a more active weather pattern is going to be impacting areas of the West as we get these atmospheric rivers coming in off the Pacific Ocean. But here up in Alaska, things are not going to be quite as active as what they were. Still some blowing snow and wind chills down to around 45 below expected in the eastern Arctic coast tonight into early Wednesday morning. We'll also see some areas of locally dense fog for the inner channels of the Panhandle tonight into Wednesday. But overall, less active weather pattern, and temperatures statewide are going to have a tendency to slowly moderate here as we head toward the new year. And overall, the early new year, the first few days there of 2023, we're looking for milder temperatures with above normal precipitation, especially centered on south central areas of the state around Cook Inlet and Prince William Sound. Looking at a few of the FAA webcams this Tuesday afternoon, Dead Horse getting blowing snow up there along the Arctic coast, 9 below zero, the air temperature. Fort Yukon, some light snow, 11 below. And then as we go down toward Dutch Harbor, after super soggy week last week with very heavy rainfall, some mudslides and flooding, they're getting a few breaks in the clouds this afternoon. 41, there's going to be some additional rain, maybe another inch or so, but nothing as heavy as what fell last week. And Soldotna, western Kenai, picking up a little light snow right now this Tuesday afternoon, 28 degrees. Well, in the far north, the only advisory we have in effect is for the eastern Arctic coast, including the Barter Islands and Kaktovik, where winds could gust to 40 miles an hour, creating blowing snow, as well as wind chills as cold as 45 below. We're also going to see just stronger winds along the Arctic coast, extending from Kaktovik westward to down along areas like Point Lay as we go into the day tomorrow, as some pretty good pressure gradient out over the ice there along the lower Beaufort Sea. Otherwise, the rest of the state, for a change, the weather map, the watch warning map, is not lit up like Christmas as it was prior to the holiday. Looking at the satellite imagery, we can see the curl in the clouds, the circulation there near and west of Adak in the western half of the Aleutians, and other lows south of Unalaska. That is going to be lifting northeastward. And eventually we're going to see kind of a string of weaker lows extending from the lower Bering Sea and Aleutians eastward across the lower Gulf, North Pacific interface. Areas of the interior are still seeing some patchy light snow and flurries, but nothing too terribly heavy at this time, nothing that would warrant any sort of warnings or advisories. And as I mentioned, the potential exists for the continuation of areas of locally dense fog in portions of the Panhandle, especially in through the inner channels tonight, lingering into the day on Wednesday. A quick check of the surface weather maps this Tuesday afternoon, a weak low east side of the Kenai, northwestern Gulf. We have a couple of lows, western portion of the Aleutians, and a little stronger low there south of the eastern Aleutians. Weak trough out over the lower Chukchi Sea coast, western portion of the Seward Peninsula, and then a weak high in the far northern Canadian Arctic coast. nothing as strong as that 1060 high we had last week. So notice by late tonight, early on Wednesday morning, the main low, 956 low, is south of the eastern Aleutians and the tip of the Alaska Peninsula, with the one low in the northwestern Gulf beginning to fill and weaken, and another one back out toward the western half of the Aleutians. And then overall Wednesday afternoon, just a string of not especially strong lows, but they extend from the central Aleutians across the northern Gulf, northern Pacific, and along the Gulf Pacific interface, with patchy flurries and light snow continuing in parts of the interior, especially along areas of the intercoastal mountains around Prince William Sound. We also have blowing snow continuing up there along areas of the Beaufort Sea coast and the Chukchi Sea coast. And then finally on Thursday, we anticipate weak high pressure over northwest Canada, just kind of a string of weaker lows out over the Gulf, extending back toward just south of the Alaska Peninsula down into the North Pacific. No super heavy precipitation, and overall this pattern is going to lend toward a gradual moderation in temperatures from south to north across the state as we head into the early new year. Here are the forecast low temperatures for Wednesday morning. We're looking for lows a bit below freezing there in the inner channels with some areas of fog. As we get back toward south central, 2 below Glen Allen, 9 below at McGrath, Anchorage about 26, and even below freezing temperatures anticipated at Kodiak. Afternoon highs Wednesday afternoon will get back up above freezing many areas of the Panhandle except for the north around Skagway and Haines, and then we'll see temperatures above freezing along the Kenai coast, say Seward down through Homer, and back up near 40 Kodiak and extending down the Alaska Peninsula. Lows Thursday morning could be sub-zero in the Copper River Basin, again, as well as on the west side of the Alaska Range. Readings bottoming out in the lower 20s for the Anchorage Bowl, and temperatures should generally be above freezing Thursday morning along the outer portion of the Panhandle. And Thursday afternoon highs should get back up well into the 20s, including the Anchorage Bowl, Cordova 28. Could see 40-degree readings at Sitka and Craig there in the west-southwest Panhandle, as well as from Kodiak southwestward. Along the Arctic coast, temperatures quite cold. We'll see some readings below 20 below, especially along the North Slope. And readings as we get into the day Wednesday are going to slowly begin to moderate. Temperatures in the single digits above or below zero, especially along and south of the Brooks Range. As we get up through the North Slope, still below zero. Some areas of the Arctic coast could see lows Thursday morning back down around 20 below or so. Generally sub-zero, but not as cold as it has been there Thursday morning along the Yukon River. And then for Thursday afternoon, temperatures still single digits above and below zero for much of the Yukon Valley, around 10 above, further west toward Nome and Savunga there on St. Lawrence. And then in the southwest, temperatures Wednesday morning should be a bit below zero as we creep up the Yukon and Kuskokwim River basins. And temperatures as we extend out along the middle Alaska Peninsula, generally above freezing, getting out there through the lower half of the Alaska Peninsula and the eastern Aleutians. Wednesday afternoon highs will be back up near 40 from Kodiak down through places like Chiknik and Sandpoint down to about Dutch Harbor. Areas further north going up the Yukon River will only be in the single digits above zero, maybe 10, 11 degrees at Anvik and Bethel. And then Thursday morning, we expect lows to still be near or below zero as you get up there through the upper Kuskokwim Basin and middle Yukon Valley. Temperatures Thursday morning above freezing across much of the Alaska Peninsula and eastern Aleutians, with daytime highs getting back up 40-ish for Kodiak down through the Alaska Peninsula and eastern Aleutians, where temperatures still holding in the lower teens, places along the southern Norton Sound and areas further up through the Yukon River. Quick check of the 6 to 10 day temperature outlook for January 2nd through the 6th to bring in the early new year. We expect above normal temperatures centered on southern areas of the mainland, even including parts of the Panhandle, but especially surrounding Cook Inlet and the upper portion of the Alaska Peninsula, including Kodiak Island, and precipitation is expected to average a bit above normal for south central areas surrounding Cook Inlet and Prince William Sound. So that brings in the early New Year weather.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Well, it's now time for your aviation weather, and if you have a flight planned either Wednesday or Thursday, we're going to continue to watch low pressure kind of strung along the Aleutians and just north of there through the lower Bering, extending eastward along the Gulf and North Pacific interface. Areas of the inland, there is going to be a weak low pressure that is winding down near Prince William Sound. IFR conditions there along the intercoastal mountains of the northern Gulf Coast, the Yakutat into the northern Panhandle. Then areas of IFR along the central western Alaska Range to around McGrath, and then a broad area of IFR eastern Brooks Range through the Fort Yukon area down in through the upper Yukon Valley, and then back along the southern portion of the Seward Peninsula, including Nome and Golovin. And areas of IFR further west out through the eastern Aleutians and western Aleutians. And by Wednesday afternoon, IFR conditions persist along the central and western Alaska Range, areas along the eastern Kenai surrounding Prince William Sound, far northern Panhandle, and then back out through areas of the western interior, including Kotzebue Sound, lower Chukchi Sea coast there on the north side of the Seward Peninsula, and then back out across a large area of the northern, central, lower Bering into the eastern Aleutians. And then Thursday morning, we expect IFR not to be quite as widespread. Still holding on, though, to areas, say from around Rainy Pass down through areas southwest, including Merrill, and then along the areas of the eastern Kenai surrounding Prince William Sound, along the southern central portion of the Brooks Range, and then back out through areas of the northern as well as the lower Bering. And finally, Thursday afternoon, rather broad area of IFR conditions expected from southern Panhandle across the Gulf to the east side of the Kenai, Kodiak Island, as well as the Alaska Peninsula, including Bristol Bay, with areas of IFR up around Utqiagvik, as well as their lower Chukchi Sea coast and north side of the Seward Peninsula. And at Tuvik Pass on Wednesday should generally see VFR conditions. Adigan Pass MVFR in the morning, giving way to VFR conditions, and then further south and west, the west side of the Alaska Range, Lake Clark and Merrill will see IFR conditions persist. Rainy Pass on up through Windy, as well as Isabel Pass will generally see IFR conditions. Isabel will maybe be MVFR in the morning, giving way to IFR. Further east, Matasta Pass, VFR becoming MVFR. And then down along Tanita Pass, VFR conditions will become MVFR. And Portage Pass, we expect MVFR conditions becoming IFR, especially the eastern half and the areas surrounding Prince William Sound. And then finally, the far north end of the Panhandle, Chilkoot and White will see IFR conditions. Freezing levels at the surface run along the middle Alaska Peninsula, west side of Kodiak Island, up along the east side of the Kenai Peninsula, and then along the northern Gulf Coast to the inner channels of the Panhandle, with 2,000-foot freezing level aloft and just bumping up to the far eastern Aleutians. And the potential for icing, there could be some pockets of considerable moderate icing surrounding Prince William Sound and the east side of the Kenai, generally above 5,000 feet. Areas within the interior will see some isolated moderate icing above 3,000 feet, and then there is another area of considerable moderate icing, potentially the east side of the Aleutians on up into the lower Bering. And jet stream level winds, not nearly as dynamic as they were prior to Christmas. We do have an area of high pressure along the Alcan border at 30,000 feet, and generally west-southwest flow 60 to as high as 90 knots coming into western British Columbia, and then a low circulation just south of the central Aleutians. At 9,000 feet, 700 millibars, we have a broad area of trough of low pressure at the mid-levels extending from the central Aleutians eastward along the Gulf North Pacific interface, and as we bring that down to 3,000 feet, you can see this troughiness along with a few weak low centers extending from the central and eastern Aleutians to just south of the Alaska Peninsula and out to just south of the Gulf, with some winds upwards of 45 to even as high as 55 knots out of the east-southeast from areas of the southeast Bering across the North Pacific side and western Gulf. Greatest threat for turbulence will be in the far north along the Arctic coast, surface to 4,000 feet, and then along the southwestern areas, including the Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island, with a pocket of isolated severe turbulence possible, especially south of Sand Point and Chicknick.
Welcome back to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder, and joining me once again is Eric Stevens from GINA, the Geographic Information Network of Alaska, based up at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Eric, welcome back to the program.
Hey, I'm glad to be here.
And once again, you brought some wonderful satellite pictures to show us and do a little show and tell about. It's just amazing. I can get lost in satellite pictures all day. What did you bring today?
Right. Well, weather satellites, what are they good for? Yeah. Of course, there's the pretty pictures that they bring us. You know, we've got a picture here from April of 2012.
Okay.
The Suomi NPP satellite, it's what they call a polar orbiter, which means it covers Alaska because we're near the pole. Beautiful image. You can see a storm off of southeast Alaska, the sea ice along the Bering Sea up into the Arctic. A really nice picture, and this is important because it allows a forecaster to see where the storms are, where the ice is, where the clear areas are. You need to know where the weather is now if you're going to forecast it into the future.
Exactly.
So satellites give us these good pictures. This is called surveillance of the weather. And you know, that same satellite also has another picture from a little more recently, August of 2014, Tropical Storm Iselle bearing down on the Hawaiian Islands.
Okay.
Hawaii doesn't get hit by a whole lot of tropical storms or hurricanes. Sometimes it does. And here's a picture from the same satellite, the Suomi NPP Polar Orbiter. It shows Tropical Storm Iselle approaching the Hawaiian Islands from the southeast. You can see the storm swirling away there, and then there's the Hawaiian Islands. This is a tropical storm, not quite as strong as a hurricane because we don't see the eye wall in there. This is still a serious weather system. And all of this information comes just from that satellite picture. It's so much information, and it's wonderful to look at. You see the beauty and the awe of nature right there depicted in that weather satellite. We call it a polar orbiter because the satellite flies high over the globe. Maybe we could look here at we happen to bring the planet Earth with us. This is our satellite. A polar orbit flies really close to the Earth, maybe 800 kilometers over the Earth, and goes up over the pole and then back down, and then the Earth spins under the satellite as it goes by. That's in contrast to the geostationary birds, which are much further out, and they don't view Alaska quite as well. So we love those polar orbiter satellites here in Alaska.
So when we're a lot closer, we get much better details and imagery and an idea of a better maybe position of what's going on when it's passing right over Alaska or right over Hawaii.
Yes, exactly right. The polar orbiter gives such a good view of places like Alaska. And because it's close to the planet, there's another aspect of satellites in the polar orbit that is helpful for weather forecasting. It's an aspect that's maybe not as immediately obvious as the pretty pictures that we see. And that is the capacity for the satellite to produce what's called a sounding. That is finding the vertical profile of temperature and moisture in the atmosphere. We've all heard of weather balloons. Weather balloons are launched here in Alaska twice a day at a number of airports, everywhere from Barrow to St. Paul Island to Kodiak, Anchorage and Fairbanks, Yakutat, a number of places. Launch these balloons, and we've got a picture of a balloon being launched at an airport, and the balloon goes up. It's pulling a little package, an instrument package with it that reports temperature, pressure, humidity data back, and we use that information to help feed what are called numerical weather prediction models.
The models.
The models, right. It's a mouthful, so we just call it the models. And these computer simulations, these models, are computer programs that simulate the motion of the atmosphere. Well, how does a model know what the future will be like? You have to tell the model what things are like now. And you give it all kinds of information, including information from these satellite sounders. Very important. Just how important are they? We have a recent, comparatively recent study that really brings home, and this is Superstorm Sandy. We have a track image here of the track of Hurricane Sandy. Was down in the Caribbean around Cuba, and then it moved north over the ocean, offshore of the eastern seaboard, and then at the last minute, Sandy made what's called the left hook. It turned hard to the left and slammed into New Jersey. Was a major problem for the mid-Atlantic states, a calamity. It fused with another weather system and became known, this is not an official title, but Superstorm Sandy.
Right.
It was quite the weather event. Well, the modelers, after the event, there's a group of modelers in Europe. They have a very good model, a frustratingly good model if you're the Americans trying to pursue their excellence. They reran their model afterwards in what's called a data denial study, where they kept everything the same. So this is 6 months after Sandy, but they went back, they reran the same model, they fed the model the same initial conditions, that is telling the model, okay, here's where we think Sandy is, down near Cuba in the Caribbean. Everything was the same as it was in the real forecast, except they didn't let the model know.
No satellite data.
No satellite data. So we're going to put that over here. No satellite data for you. The resulting forecast 5 days out, back when the real Sandy was happening and the model had the satellite data, the forecast was pretty good. We've got a graphic here on the left side. We show the forecast of where Sandy would be, and that's the red bullseye on the left. It's just south of where it actually wound up hitting. Not a bad forecast from this computer simulation, 120 hours out. On the right, you see the same model, but it didn't have the satellite data to help it understand things. And the storm is way offshore. It misses. The forecast is more accurate when the model has the satellite data. So that's the idea today we want to convey is weather satellites. They're important because they show us the pictures of where storms are. We see good examples of this. Yeah, the surveillance right now, it's great to look at those pictures. And in addition, behind the scenes, maybe not immediately obvious, but the models have to have that satellite data for them to be good forecasts, and then a meteorologist uses that information to help everyone with the forecast of where the storms will be in the future.
That is fascinating information that we can look at and see where things have been, because you can't know where you're going if you don't know where you've been. That's that old adage there. But seeing that satellites are actually helping us move forward in the weather information system is pretty amazing stuff.
You bet.
And if you want to check out Eric's satellite images that he's been talking about, whether that's something from today or last week or even much further back in Alaska history, you can easily do that yourself. Go to www.gina.alaska.edu and you can find those images there. Eric, thanks so much for joining us once again. And again, we will join you hopefully again soon for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts, where you'll tell us more really cool information about the satellites over our heads in Alaska. Thanks for joining us tonight, and we'll see you next time.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back, and let's start out with the sea ice edge as we get into our marine weather segment. Extensive ice is occurring now across the far north, including the Beaufort Sea coast and the Chukchi Sea coast, and areas surrounding Norton Sound and Kotzebue Sounds, as well as down through the Bering Strait and surrounding St. Lawrence Island. The ice has expanded further west off the southwest coast to near St. Matthew, and also expanded down along areas of the Bristol Bay coastline and up through the northern half of Cook Inlet. We did see the ice move a fair amount with those very strong northeasterly winds on Friday. For the southeast panhandle, winds will be out of the southeast, inner channels, waves 2 to 4 feet with areas of fog, especially in the morning. Outer coast, south winds 25 knots off of Sitka and Craig with 10-foot waves, and southeast winds 10 to 15 knots north of Sitka through Yakutat with waves around 9 feet. On Thursday, we're going to have another frontal system approaching from the southwest. We have southeasterly to easterly gale force winds to 35 knots with waves of 19 to 20 feet. For the open waters of the Gulf, inner channels, winds will still be ahead of that front. Northerly gusting upwards of 45 knots, Lynn Canal with 6-foot waves. And down on the south end, Ketchikan, Metlakatla, looking at southeast 30-knot winds gusting to 40 and 9-foot waves there, Dixon entrance. For the northwestern Gulf, winds will be out of the northeast to east off the Kenai coast, 7-foot waves. Northeasterly winds 25 knots, 6-foot waves in through Prince William Sound in the lower half of Cook Inlet. Look for northeast to east winds 20 to 25 knots, waves 7 to 9 feet. Thursday, winds strengthen across the region. Generally, easterly winds for the open waters of the Gulf, 35 to 40 knots, waves 15 to 17 feet. Lower half of Cook Inlet, 35 to 40 knot northeasterly gales with waves as high as 14 to 18 feet. Across the southwest, Kodiak Island, including the Alaska Peninsula, generally northeast to east winds 30 to 35 knots. Look for waves 10 to 15 feet on the North Pacific and West Gulf Coast side, 5 to 9 feet from Bristol Bay down to north of Cold Bay. And for Thursday, 40-knot northeast winds through Shelikof Strait, 18-foot waves. Winds are going to turn westerly south of Sand Point to 30 knots with 14-foot waves, while winds will generally be out of the east-northeast at 30 knots, Bristol Bay down through north of Cold Bay with 5 to 9-foot waves. Mixed bag of winds across the Aleutian chain, generally around 30 knots, the eastern half, waves 11 to 15 feet North Pacific side, 6 to 10 feet on the Bering side. And then on Thursday, with an area of low pressure that will be passing through the eastern Aleutians, we expect on the backside of that, winds turning to the north 25 to 30 knots with even 40-knot northwesterly gales west of Adak, waves generally 8 to 11 feet on the Bering side and around 10 to 12 feet on the North Pacific side. Fair amount of ice along the southwest coast, Norton Sound, and surrounding St. Lawrence Island. Winds generally 20 to 30 knots expected along the ice interface there and through the eastern Bering Sea with waves 8 to 11 feet. And then on Thursday, winds turn more northerly up through Norton Sound and between St. Lawrence and Nunavik Island at 25 knots. Open waters near St. Matthew and down towards St. Paul, we're looking at waves around 10 to 11 feet. Along the Arctic coast, brisk east winds to 25 knots, though ice is in place. There'll be areas of blowing snow. Same thing as we go down along the northwest coast, Utqiagvik down toward Point Lay. Winds should pick up a bit and be as high as 35 knots off of Cape Lisburne and Point Hope. On Thursday, ice is widespread through the region. Look for easterly winds down slightly to 20 knots along the Beaufort Sea coast and east to northeast 20 to 25 knots through the lower Chukchi Sea and increasing to 25 knots to the north side of St. Lawrence. And a quick check of the weather map shows a couple of low pressures there in the Aleutians and just south of the eastern Aleutian, a weakening low in the northern Gulf. And then on Wednesday, we expect pressure gradient to increase a bit there across the Gulf, and that'll be the trend into Thursday with some stronger winds along the northern Gulf with a string of low pressures extending from the eastern Gulf down to just south of the Alaska Peninsula and then into the North Pacific north of the eastern Aleutians. So thank you for watching the show, and be sure to join me again tomorrow night.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.